Thank you, Chairman. And I wouldn't like my constituents to think I'm travelling too much, but definitely travel at the moment has somewhat increased. But Senators, Deputy Senators, I'm delighted to be here again to update the Committee on developments. As usual, it has been a very busy time since I was with you here last in December, not least in relation to Brexit. As you rightly said yesterday, I attended the General Affairs Council, and at that meeting our focus was primarily on the MFF, preparations for the March European Council and the Commission proposal towards a sustainable Europe by 2030. Ministers also discussed the rule of law in Poland and, as well as that, values in the Union and Hungary. With your permission, Chairman, I propose to focus on 4 headlines today. They are, firstly, our preparedness and contingency plans for Brexit. Secondly, the MFF, Multiannual Financial Framework. Thirdly, an update on other issues discussed during yesterday's meeting. And finally, I'll give the Committee an overview of the work Ireland is undertaking in terms of building alliances across the EU, something that I know the Committee is focused on and committed to as well. Firstly, let me update the Committee on Brexit. A no-deal Brexit would be highly disruptive and it would have profound political, economic but also legal implications, most seriously for the UK but also for Ireland and the rest of the EU. In light of the ongoing political uncertainties in the UK and the Brexit deadline of the 29th of March, which is just a few short weeks away, the Government agreed that greater priority should be given immediately to preparations for a no-deal. Since then, the Government published its Brexit Contingency Action Plan on the 19th of December. This sets out in detail sectoral analysis and approaches to mitigating the impact of a no-deal Brexit. The plan is designed to be consistent with, but also complementary to the approach that's been taken at an EU 27 level to prepare for the UK's departure and withdrawal. The legislative provisions envisaged in that plan are due to be published this Friday and will be introduced in the Dáil next week. I'll now focus on the non-legislative preparedness measures being taken to ensure that the East-West trade continues as smooth as possible. We are, of course, developing the additional physical infrastructure which is needed at our ports and airports. At Dublin and Rossall airports, sites suitable for temporary infrastructure have been identified and refurbishment work has already begun. Space for truck parking has been secured in both locations. At the same time, plans to advance the development of permanent infrastructure in both ports. At Dublin Airport, existing facilities can cater for the volumes of traffic involved in the event of a no-deal Brexit. Revenue will have 400 additional customs staff trained and in place by the end of March, but they can also recruit an additional 200 by the end of this year. The Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine is implementing the necessary steps to facilitate more sanitary and phytosanitary controls. Veterinary personnel and 70 other supported staff are now being recruited to implement animal and health checks with the SPS, as are 61 extra environmental health staff. In budgets 2017, 18 and 19, the Government put in place supports to help business prepare for Brexit. These include a €300 million future growth loan scheme and a separate €300 million Brexit loan scheme for business. Ireland is also preparing for Brexit as part of the EU 27, and with the full support of the European Commission, many of the actions aimed at mitigating the effects of a no-deal outcome will be taken at an EU level, as they involve sectors regulated by the EU. The European Commission published its contingency plan in November and a communication on contingency in December. These contained guidance on planning for Brexit, but also outlined their approach in a number of key areas. The EU has published over 80 Brexit preparedness notices in total. The Commission's contingency action plan emphasises that it stands ready to engage with the Member States that it will be most affected by a no-deal withdrawal, and states that the Commission will absolutely support Ireland in finding solutions addressing the specific challenges of Brexit. The EU has agreed to facilitate basic connectivity in air transport and road haulage between the UK and the EU on an interim basis, and this is on a no-deal scenario. Our Government continues to engage in intensive discussions with the European Commission and also with our EU partners, and I know my colleague in the Taoiseach gave quite a detailed discussion and answered questions for this committee, as with the Foreign Affairs Committee also last week. Chairman, in terms of the MFF, the European Council had its first substantive discussion on the MFF proposal in December, following a number of policy discussions at the General Affairs Council, which I attend in the autumn. The ground was well prepared by the Austrian Presidency, which presented a draft negotiating box. Essentially, this document outlines the key issues which will require political decisions at the end of the day. We welcome that work was balanced and fair, and we see it as the basis for ongoing work within the Council. However, we have stressed that we don't feel that the balance is just quite right yet. The heads of state and government also said that the Council should aim to reach agreement on the MFF in the autumn of this year, and again this is something that we would agree with. As Council President Tusk has highlighted, there is still a lot of work to be done to reach a common position. Each Member State has its own priorities, as does the European Parliament, which is also part of the negotiating geometry. Negotiations on the MFF are always difficult, but these negotiations have an added complexity due to the uncertainty surrounding Brexit. The European Parliament election will also have an impact, hence the likelihood is that an agreement will not be reached in Council until the latter half of this year. Since December, the General Affairs Council has had 2 discussions on the subject, the latest just yesterday in Brussels. Yesterday, the Romanian Presidency presented Ministers with the State of Play report, which includes a work programme for the months ahead. The Presidency will focus now on narrowing down the range of options contained within the negotiating box, and their aim is to have a revised negotiating box prepared ahead of the June European Council. It's expected that the General Affairs Council will hold a series of thematic discussions in the meantime to provide the Presidency with political guidance on some of the cross-cutting aspects of the budget, and some which we have suggested in terms of climate change and migration, as well as others, contingency on others. Work is also underway in agreeing the sectoral programmes, which the new budget will fund either at a Council level or in some cases in trialogue in the European Parliament, while that is still possible. Consideration of the proposed euro area budget is also underway. The Irish position has not changed, Cathaoirleach. Since I last addressed the committee, as the Taoiseach emphasised at the December European Council, we want a well-funded common agricultural policy. The Taoiseach also underlined the need to protect the structural and cohesion funds for countries in Central and Eastern Europe and the Mediterranean. Ireland, as we know, benefited enormously from these funds and from the investment in our own infrastructure, which was only made possible by these funds in years gone by. In the current climate, we want to ensure the continued funding for the Interreg and peace programmes, which are integral to the Good Friday Agreement and the peace process, which are particularly important to Northern Ireland and the border region. It is essential that we continue to fund other programmes that work as well as Erasmus programmes, or Erasmus Plus, which is particularly valuable to young people. Other examples of Horizon Europe, or which was Horizon 2020, which will support the necessary investment in research and development to create jobs of the future. In terms of the overall GAC agenda, I'll now go on to the topics discussed at the meeting yesterday. We discussed the agenda for the next month's European Council. The March meeting will discuss quite a range of issues, from climate change by providing guidance on the overall direction of an EU long-term strategy to be submitted under the Paris Agreement. They will also prepare for the EU-China Summit, which will take place in April. In preparation for the next EU strategic agenda, the March Council will focus on jobs, growth and competitiveness, as it always does at this General March meeting. We welcome the inclusion of this topic in the European Council agenda, and we're very much looking forward to a substantive discussion at the meeting. Ireland has consistently been a strong supporter of the single market, of removing the restrictions to trade in goods and services within the EU, and in particular we have stressed, and I emphasised yesterday, the need to make progress on the area of services within the single market. This is essential for the competitiveness of all Member States and for Europe to remain competitive with other global trading blocs. Ireland and 4 other Member States commissioned a recent report through the Copenhagen Economics Report called Making EU Trade in Services Work for All, and what it very clearly shows is that the strength of the single market is linked intricately with Europe's competitiveness in the world stage and with European prosperity, so it is an important focus for us. My colleagues and I also exchanged views yesterday on the Commission's reflection paper towards a Sustainable Europe 2030. The paper outlines how EU policies contributing towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, where further action is required also. Ireland welcomes the paper as another confirmation of the EU's ongoing commitment to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, but I think what was clear from the discussions yesterday also is that we would hope it would bring a renewed sense of urgency about this, because obviously the goals were first agreed over 3 years ago now. In particular, we support the paper's reaffirmation that sustainable development is deeply rooted in the European projects, and as again I repeated to the Commissioner yesterday, many Member States, including Ireland, have our own national implementation strategies, and so the focus should be now on a practical implementation, an ambitious plan, not general discussion within the European Union. Finally, 2 important topics which have preoccupied, I think, the General Affairs Council, namely the rule of law in Poland and the values of the Union in Hungary. The General Affairs Council have held 5 hearings on Poland, which took place last year, and the Romanian Presidency updated ministers on those issues yesterday. As the committee will be aware, the central issue is the rule of law and its application there. In October, the European Court of Justice issued an interim ruling ordering Poland to adopt measures to temporarily suspend the application of Polish legislation, which had lowered the retirement age for sitting judges and future judges. Poland has since adopted legislation to amend the Supreme Court and to enable the return to work of judges forced to retire. This move was in response to the interim ruling, and a final judgment for the European Court is due within the next few months. Chairman, ours is a union based on shared values. This includes democracy, human rights and the rule of law, and Ireland has consistently supported the Commission in this matter and in our discussions. In my intervention yesterday, I urged Poland to continue to engage with the Commission on concerns that have been aired, obviously acknowledging the work that they have done to date and the importance of that, but also acknowledging the fact that Vice President Timmermans also raised further concerns yesterday that we had not heard of before, and so we urge them to continue to engage with them on that. The Presidency itself concluded that the Council will remain seized of the issue. The Presidency also updated ministers on Hungary yesterday. As you know, the Parliament referred an option or opinion on the value of the European Union to the Council following the adoption of the Sargentini report. The Commission has since prepared a paper on the values-related infringement procedures that it takes to address concerns about the situation in Hungary. Ireland has previously made its concerns known in relation to issues surrounding the rule of law, particularly recent legislation targeting non-governmental actors in Hungary. Several member states, including Ireland, yesterday expressed concerns about the current situation in Hungary, and the Presidency promised to return to the issue in due course. Again, at this time, when we are facing many challenges within the Union, it is now more than ever important that we stand by our shared values. There was also a new development raised by the Commissioner yesterday in relation to a government-funded campaign in Hungary, specifically targeting George Soros, but also the President of the Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker. And I think this is a worrying new development, and obviously these issues need to be dealt with on the basis of mutual respect, and that I would hope we would be able to discuss that again at a further date. Finally, you'll be pleased to hear if I could just focus on alliance building to strengthening the EU. Ireland has always been an outward-looking country and recognise that our influence grows through cooperation with others. As we are reminded during the Dáil 100 celebrations, one of the first acts of the Dáil was to send a message to the free nations of the world to ask for their support on our search for independence. The presence of so many of our friends and our EU partners at the celebrations and the remarkable solidarity that have been experienced throughout the Brexit negotiations, it is a testament to Ireland's message being heard, but also to our place at the heart of Europe. Solidarity is built on understanding, shared perspectives and reciprocity. Apologies. It is a priority for us to thank our European partners for the solidarity they have shown to us, but it is also essential that we understand their perspectives on the full range of issues we face in our shared union and to discuss our priorities for the future. To do this, we have strategically increased our range and intensity of our contacts with other member states, but also institutions. We've intensified our political and official level engagement, strengthened our diplomatic presence and undertaken joint initiatives to try and shape the EU agenda in a way that best reflects the interests of the Irish people. The Taoiseach, the Taoiseach and I have stepped up bilateral engagement with our European counterparts last year, along with my General Affairs visits and other Council meetings. I managed to visit 9 other EU capitals as well as the European Parliament in Strasbourg, and I look forward to meeting with my Latvian and Lithuanian counterparts in Riga and Vilnius later this month. The Government's ambitious programme for Visit of St Patrick's Day will serve as a platform to underline Ireland's commitment to and our membership of the European Union. Ministers will visit all 27 European capitals over the St Patrick's Day period. Extra personnel have been added to key missions and more will follow in this summer's rotation. A Consulate General will open in Cardiff shortly, and on foot of a root and branch review of our relations in Germany, a new consulate will also open in Frankfurt in the autumn. The Ambassador in Paris is also due to make a presentation and proposals to the Taoiseach and myself in April as part of a wider review of our excellent relationship with France. I also want to recognise the very important role that this committee plays in strengthening our engagement with both current and prospective member states. I'm heartened to see that this is reflected in your own work programme for the coming year, and I thank you for your efforts. I want to thank you for the invitation, as always, to address this committee. Thank you, Chairman, and to your team for the work that you do, and I look forward to any questions from the deputies and senators. Thank you.
Minister.